My name is Renata Castellano. I'm 46. The night my brother unveiled the new sign, I was standing in the parking lot in the dress I'd bought for the occasion, holding a bottle of Prosecco I never got to open, watching a crane lift a 12-foot piece of backlit acrylic that said, Nico's. Where? Castellano's. Used to be. 200 people clapped. My mother cried. My brother stood under it with his arms out, like a man accepting a key to a city, and when a cousin asked him, loud enough for the crowd to hear, whether I'd be taking over the kitchen books again this season, Nico laughed. The easy laugh, the one that had opened doors for him his whole life, and said, Renata? She was just helping out. What none of them knew, standing in that parking lot, clapping for a sign with my dead father's restaurant erased off the front of it, was that the Rhode Island liquor license taped inside the front door, the one that had to be visible from the street by law, still had my name on it. Not Nico's, mine. It had been mine for 11 years, so had the LLC. Before I tell you how the sign came down, because it did come down, in front of the same 200 people, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Let me back up. My father, Salvatore Castellano, opened the restaurant in 1988 with a $5,000 loan from his brother-in-law and a recipe for braised short ribs that he refused to write down for 30 years. He named it after our family because, he used to say, a family name on a building was a promise you had to keep showing up for. He had 2 kids. Nico was born first, 3 years before me, and from the day he could hold a spoon, my father decided Nico was the restaurant's future. Nico had the face for it. Dark eyes, easy charm, the kind of warmth that made strangers feel like regulars in 90 seconds. I had the spreadsheets. By the time I was 14, I was doing inventory on Sunday nights while Nico was upstairs practicing the speech he'd give someday when he took over. He never actually worked a full shift until he was 26. I never stopped. Here's a number for you. $41,000. That's what I put into payroll out of my own savings account in 2019, the year our walk-in cooler died in July, and the insurance claim took 5 months to process. Nico was in Miami that July, at a wedding. I found the invoice for the new compressor in a drawer 3 years later, still creased from where I'd folded it to fit in my purse. Here's another one. 3. That's how many times my father changed his will in the last 2 years of his life, and every single time, it was because Nico had asked him for something. A truck, a down payment on a condo, a loan that was never repaid and never called a loan out loud. My mother has a phrase she used every Thanksgiving, standing at the stove, not looking at either of us. Nico shines, and Renata handles it. She meant it as a compliment. It never felt like one. Small thing. My father kept a photo behind the register, him at 30, holding up the first dollar the restaurant ever made, framed and yellowed. When he died, that photo disappeared from the wall for 6 weeks. I found it in Nico's car, in a box with his sunglasses and a stack of unopened parking tickets. He said he was getting it reframed. He never did. You keep score without meaning to. I know that now. He was quietly proud of me too, though. That's the part people forget when they hear this kind of story. It wasn't all neglect. My father used to sit with me on Tuesday mornings, before the lunch rush, going over the books, and he'd tap the ledger with 2 fingers and say, You're the one who keeps the lights on, Renata. Don't ever let anyone tell you that isn't worth something. I didn't understand, then, that he was preparing me for something specific. I thought it was just a nice thing a tired man said to his daughter. 12 years ago, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He had 4 months. In the 3rd month, weak enough that signing his name took him almost a full minute, he called me into his hospital room alone. Not Nico, just me, and he had our family attorney, a quiet, precise man named Warren Iyer, bring papers. He restructured the business into an LLC. He put my name on it as sole managing member. He transferred the liquor license application into my name because, under state law, the license has to sit with a person actively running day-to-day operations, and my father told the licensing board, in writing, that this had always been me. He never told Nico. I asked him why. He looked at me for a long time before he answered, and what he said was short and blunt, the way exhausted honesty usually is. Because he'll sell it. 3 words. That's all it took to explain 30 years of watching his son. My father died 6 weeks later. At the funeral, Nico gave a beautiful eulogy about legacy and family and carrying the torch. Half the room cried. I stood in the back, holding a folder of legal documents I hadn't shown anyone yet, and I made a decision that I now understand was a mistake. Not a moral one, but a strategic one. I decided to let Nico believe he was in charge. I told myself it was kindness. It was actually fear. Fear of the fight I'd have to have with my own brother in the same month I buried my father. So for 12 years, Nico ran front of house like the restaurant belonged to him, because as far as anyone watching could tell, it did. I did everything else. Payroll, health inspections, insurance renewals, vendor contracts, the lease negotiation with our landlord, a man named Peter Vasquez, who I met with every March like clockwork while Nico was somewhere being photographed with a plate of osso buco for the restaurant's Instagram. I never took a salary in the traditional sense. I paid myself a bookkeeper's wage, $22 an hour, while Nico drew an owner's draw that tripled mine. When I brought it up once, in year 4, he said, "You're not really front-facing, Ren. That's just how the math works. That's just how the math works." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because it's going to come back later, and when it does, it's going to mean something very different. The gift became a weapon slowly. That's how it usually happens, not with a slammed door, but with erosion. It started with the website. In year 7, Nico redesigned it, and the About Us page went from founded by Salvatore Castellano, run today by his children, to founded by Salvatore Castellano, carried forward by his son Nico. My name wasn't removed. It just quietly stopped being added anywhere new. Then the local newspaper feature, year 9, a lovely piece about family-owned restaurants surviving the pandemic. Nico was interviewed alone. When the reporter asked about the team, he said, "My sister helps out with the books." Helps out. Like I was a neighbor's kid doing dishes for gas money, instead of the person who'd personally called our landlord in the middle of the night in 2020 to negotiate 3 months of deferred rent so the restaurant wouldn't close. Then the wreath. Every December, we hung the same wreath on the door that my father hung. A plain evergreen one with a small brass C ornament tucked into it. For Castellano, that my mother had made the year the restaurant opened. In year 10, I noticed the C ornament was gone. I asked Nico about it. He said it fell off and he must have thrown it out by accident. I didn't believe him, but I let it go, because that is what I always did. Then came the number that mattered. In year 11, an investor group approached Nico about a buyout, not the whole restaurant, but a 40% stake, to fund a second location in Newport. The offer was $620,000. Nico told me about it over the phone, casually, like he was telling me about a parking ticket. He said, "We're doing a deal. It's basically done. I just need you to sign off on some paperwork as the bookkeeper of record." $620,000. He said that number to me the way you'd mention the weather. I said I needed to see the paperwork first. He said there wasn't time. That was the first time in 12 years my brother had ever rushed me. Here's the smoking gun, because every story like this has one, and mine came in an email. 3 weeks after that phone call, Warren Iyer, my father's old attorney, who still handled the LLC's annual filings, forwarded me a document he'd been copied on by mistake. It was a draft investment agreement. In it, Nico was listed as 100% owner and managing member of Castellano's Restaurant Group, LLC. My name did not appear anywhere in the ownership section. There was a signature line for a bookkeeper's acknowledgement of financial records, pre-filled with my name, positioned to look, to any outside investor, like a formality, not an ownership stake. He wasn't asking me to sign off on a deal. He was asking me to sign away the appearance of ever having owned anything. I called Warren. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said the kind of sentence you remember for the rest of your life, delivered in the calm, dry voice of a man who has watched 100 families do this to each other. "Renata, the most dangerous thief in any family isn't the one who steals," he said. It's the one who genuinely believes access was always the same thing as ownership. Your brother isn't lying to the investors. He's lying to himself first. That's usually worse. I didn't confront Nico. I didn't call my mother. I didn't post anything, say anything, raise my voice once. I did what my father raised me to do. The thing Nico never learned because he never had to. I got quiet, and I got organized. I pulled the LLC operating agreement. I pulled the liquor license renewal, filed under my name that very spring, current, notarized, on record with the state. I pulled 12 years of tax filings showing me as managing member. I asked Warren to prepare a formal notice, not a lawsuit, not yet, just documentation, establishing, on paper, exactly who owned what. No shouting, no sabotage, just facts, documents, and timing. And then Nico did the thing that made timing easy. He announced the rebrand. He didn't ask me. He told me, at a Sunday dinner, that the investment deal had closed, quietly, without my signature, using a workaround Warren later confirmed was legally shaky, but not yet illegal, and that as part of the new capital, the restaurant was being relaunched under a new name. Nico's. New signage, new logo, a grand reopening in 6 weeks, catered, press invited, the whole neighborhood on the guest list. He told me this while passing the bread basket. He said, "You'll obviously still help with the books, Ren. Nothing changes for you day to day. Nothing changes for you." I said okay. I smiled. I passed the Parmesan. Inside, I was doing math. The liquor license transfer paperwork required for a legal name and branding change on a licensed premises has to go through the Town Liquor Control Board, and it requires the license holder's signature. Mine. He couldn't legally reopen under a new name serving alcohol without me. He just didn't know that, because he'd never once, in 12 years, read the license taped to the inside of our own front door. The reveal was going to deliver itself. I just had to let the date arrive. The grand reopening was staged exactly the way Nico staged everything. Big, warm, generous-looking, a little bit theater, 200 guests, a ribbon, a local news crew from Channel 10, because Nico had personally called in a favor from a producer he golfed with. My mother wore the pearl earrings she'd worn to my father's funeral. Nico gave a speech about legacy that didn't include my father's name once. At 6:19 p.m., while the crane was still finishing the sign installation and the caterers were setting up the Prosecco table, a woman I didn't recognize walked up to Nico with a clipboard. She introduced herself as Deputy Clerk Marguerite Hall from the Town Liquor Control Board, there for what she called a standard verification visit tied to the branding change filing. Someone, and it wasn't me. I never called anyone. I simply hadn't stopped the automated renewal notice the board sends every license holder 90 days before a name change goes into effect. Had flagged that the new signage didn't match the name on file with the state. She asked Nico, in front of the Channel 10 camera, a single question that did more work than I ever could have. "Sir, the license posted inside lists Renata Castellano as sole managing member. Is she here? We need her signature to authorize the name transfer before you can legally serve alcohol under the new name tonight." The room went quiet, the way rooms do, when they realize they've been watching the wrong person the whole time. I watched my brother's face do something I had never seen it do in 46 years. It didn't perform. For 1 second, before he found his charm again, he just looked lost. My sister handles some of the paperwork," he said. She's not an owner. She just..." "According to the state of Rhode Island, sir," Deputy Hall said, checking her clipboard, not unkindly, "she is the owner." Someone near the back, I found out later it was our cousin Angela, the same one who'd asked Nico if I'd be taking over the books again, said it loud enough for half the crowd to catch, and it was the rhetorical question that did the rest of the work for me. Wait, why is her name on the deed? Not the deed, the license. But it didn't matter. The question was already loose in the room. A plate dropped somewhere near the bar. One of the caterers, startled by the sudden hush, lost her grip on a tray of empty champagne flutes, and the sound of glass on concrete seemed to last a long time. My mother's hand went to the pearl earrings. Nico's business partner, one of the investors, a man in a blue blazer who had put $180,000 of his own money into this exact evening, took his ring hand out of his pocket and just held it there, very still, like he was doing math he didn't want to finish out loud. I walked forward. I hadn't planned to speak. I'd planned to let the paperwork speak, but 200 people were looking at me now, and Deputy Hall was still holding out her clipboard, waiting. "I'll sign," I said, "but not for tonight's name. For the real one." I signed my name, once, clearly, under the bright temporary lights the caterers had strung for the party. Then I asked Deputy Hall, politely, whether the board had any objection to a license holder declining to authorize a rebrand she'd never approved. She said no objection at all. It was, after all, my license to grant or withhold. The crane operator, who had no idea he'd become part of a family reckoning, sat in his cab, engine idling, waiting for someone to tell him whether to finish lowering the Nico's. Sign or not? I told him not to. I told him my father's name goes back up tonight, or the sign doesn't go up at all. They put the old Castellano's sign back up 2 days later, cheaper, in the moment, than fighting a licensed owner in front of a news crew. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It cascaded, the way these things do. Channel 10 ran a 90-second segment that weekend. Gentle, not vicious, more human interest than scandal, but it included one line from Deputy Hall confirming the ownership discrepancy, and that line traveled further than the segment itself. The investor in the blue blazer pulled out within the week. His attorney called Warren directly to confirm the ownership structure before the deal formally collapsed. Nico lost the Newport expansion entirely, not because of me, because he'd built a pitch to investors on a foundation that wasn't his to build on, and eventually foundations like that get checked. Nico's first response was the non-apology, delivered through a joint statement his new business partner's PR contact helped him write, posted to the restaurant's Instagram. There's been some confusion about ownership structure during our exciting rebrand process. We're proud of our family's 12-year journey together and look forward to clarity moving forward. It said nothing. It named no one. It fooled no one who'd been in that parking lot. 2 weeks later, alone, without a publicist, he called me. Not a text. A phone call, which for Nico was itself a kind of admission. He didn't apologize fully. He wasn't capable of that yet. But he said one true thing, quietly. The first honest sentence I think he'd said to me in a decade. I never actually looked at the paperwork, Ren. Any of it. I always thought if I acted like it was mine, eventually it would be. I told him that wasn't an apology. He said he knew. My mother took it hardest, in her own way. She'd spent 12 years telling her friends how proud she was of Nico's restaurant. Now half those friends had seen the Channel 10 clip. She didn't call me for a month. Here's the part I didn't expect. An employee, our longtime line cook, a soft-spoken man named Desmond who had worked at Castellano's for 19 years, almost lost his job in the scramble, because Nico, panicking, trying to look like he was still in control of something, cut the kitchen schedule in half the week after the reopening to cover the sudden legal fees. Desmond has 2 kids and a mortgage. He didn't do anything wrong. He just happened to be standing closest to the blast radius. I hired him back onto payroll myself, under my authority as license holder, before Nico even finished his second attempt at a statement. That's the part of this story nobody claps for, but it's the part that mattered most to me. People ask me if I felt triumphant, standing in that parking lot 2 days later, watching my father's real name go back up in lights. I didn't. I felt clean. I felt tired. Not relief. Freedom, maybe, but freedom that costs something on the way in. You don't get your father's name back on a building without also losing the version of your brother you spent 40 years hoping would eventually see you. 8 months later, the restaurant is still called Castellano's. Nico doesn't run front of house anymore, not the way he used to. He works 3 shifts a week as a manager, on payroll now, under a formal operating agreement Warren drew up that gives him a real, documented stake. Smaller than he wanted, larger than nothing, earned instead of assumed. It wasn't punishment. It was math, finally done honestly. My mother apologized in March. Not a big speech. She's never been a speech person. That was always Nico's gift. She came into the restaurant on a slow Tuesday afternoon, sat at the bar, and said, "I confused being loud with being right for a long time. I'm sorry, Renata. No ornamentation. Just that." I cried in the walk-in cooler for 4 minutes afterward, the same cooler I'd paid to fix out of my own savings account 7 years before. We are not fully healed. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think the version of this story where everyone hugs and the restaurant becomes a symbol of family unity is a lie, and I'm done telling comfortable lies for other people's comfort. Nico and I have dinner once a month now. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's 50 minutes of silence over pasta. We are rebuilding something, but it isn't the thing we lost. It's a different, smaller thing, built on paperwork instead of assumption, and I've come to believe that's actually more honest than what we had before. Last month, I used part of the settlement from the investor's exit clause, money that was legally mine as majority owner, separate from the restaurant's operating funds, to open something new. Not a restaurant. A scholarship fund at the community college's culinary program, named after my father, for line cooks like Desmond who never get their names on anything. The first plaque went up in April. It's small, brass, about the size of the ornament that used to hang on our wreath. Which reminds me, the wreath. This December, going through a box of old holiday decorations in the restaurant's storage room, I found the missing brass C ornament, the one that disappeared in year 10. It had been sitting in an unlabeled envelope in Nico's old desk drawer the whole time, not thrown away at all. He must have taken it down himself, back when he needed the sign to read differently in his own head before he ever tried to change it on the building. I hung it back on the wreath myself, on the same door, under the same sign that says what it always should have said. I think about my father's Tuesday morning ledger lessons a lot now. You're the one who keeps the lights on. Don't ever let anyone tell you that isn't worth something. I used to think that sentence was about accounting. I don't think that anymore. I think it was about ownership, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself with a speech or a sign or a crane, the kind that just shows up, every Tuesday, for 12 years, whether anyone's clapping or not. If there's a person watching this who's been the one who just helps out, the one who covers the gap, fixes the cooler, signs the lease, remembers the anniversary nobody else remembers, I want you to hear this clearly. Being quiet about what you built was never the same thing as not owning it. Document what's yours, not because you're planning a fight, because someday, someone might try to rename it, and you deserve to have the paperwork already say the truth. Would you have signed that clipboard the way I did, or would you have let the sign go up? Tell me in the comments. Has someone in your family ever tried to take credit for something you quietly built? I read every one. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection. Some names are worth putting back on the door yourself, even if it takes 12 years, and even if the person who takes it down is someone you love.